Nearly every day, new reports are coming out of government spying on Americans, foreign nationals, and world leaders. The latest documents to be released reveal a program where the National Security Agency tapped into communication lines belonging to Google and Yahoo. The Obama administration has been recently exposed tapping phone and electronic communications of at least 35 world leaders. Edward Snowden has recently told the public that no phone call is made in America without being noted by federal authorities. Knowledge of the widespread surveillance program has caused a fury among both Republicans and Democrats. A bipartisan bill before both houses of Congress would roll back the power of government to conduct such programs. Even the author of the Patriot Act is now saying eavesdropping has gone too far. Colleen Rowley is a former FBI special agent. She was named one of Time magazine's People of the Year in 2002. Rowley has recently referred to the upcoming replacements of Keith Alexander and James Clapper as moving chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Colleen Rowley is our guest on the show today. She's here to talk to us about the rise of the surveillance state and where the program is today. We will also discuss the role spying plays in the war on terror and the future of the programs. Welcome to the show, Colleen.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Colleen, how far does government spying go beyond what we already know now?
Well, we know a lot due to Edward Snowden's disclosures about the NSA, but in fact there are at least 15 other major intelligence agencies, and right now there's no whistleblower in each of those agencies telling us about their own programs. The total information awareness idea that Poindexter proposed back after 9/11 and was shot down actually took flight in all of the agencies in different forms. And so what we're hearing about the NSA is actually exists in these other agencies and in all the private contractors as well, only the public doesn't know it.
Now, the primary agencies that are spoken of, NSA, National Security Agency, Central Intelligence Agency, but what are some of these other agencies you speak of?
Well, the State Department has an intelligence agency. They all have different acronyms. The State Department's is INR, and it's one of the smaller ones. The FBI, half of the FBI, and maybe more than that now after 9/11, is now focused on intelligence. And there's the Department of Defense's intelligence agency. So there's a total of about 16 in the community. But there are smaller ones, and I could not name those. So there really are a few hundred.
Now, are they more or less compartmentalized, or are they actively sharing intelligence?
Well, this is the problem. This was my memo. My whistleblower memo after 9/11 was criticizing the failure to share intelligence, not only within agencies, but between agencies. And so the lesson learned from 9/11 was that there should be the connecting the dots could only occur if agencies shared information with each other and with the public. Unfortunately, this seems to have gone backwards. I mean, this lesson has just been totally buried in many ways because this excessive secrecy on the part of the government. And all of these private contractors, there's a couple thousand private contractors that are working in the different intelligence community agencies.
So when you say private contractors, are you speaking of individuals like an Edward Snowden, or are you talking about a corporation that is a group of people?
Well, Edward Snowden worked for a company, Booz Allen Hamilton, that is one of the well-known, actually larger private contractors. And there's a revolving door between these private contractors. The difference between a private contractor and a government agency, of course, is that the private contractor is in it for the profits and the money. So you have people like the former NSA director and CIA director Michael Hayden, going to become the head of Booz Allen. He goes back and forth. He's a revolving door between the public agency. There's very tight relationships. But these private contractors are in it for money. And there's a couple thousand of those on top of the government agencies. There is some integrity on the part of the government agencies because they are supposed to be having the public's interest at heart.
Yeah, and I want to ask you that because according to the Constitution and the way that the government is set up, those agencies are supposed to be beholden to the American people. But then when they outsource the data collection, now the corporation is only beholden to their contractor, and anything can go on within the doors of that corporation. So who's holding them accountable?
Well, it's supposed to be the intelligence committees, but the intelligence committees have admitted themselves that they were not able to do this. And this is frankly where we're at right now. We're in this very deplorable situation of all of them more or less claiming that it wasn't their fault. The head of the NSA, Keith Alexander, claims it wasn't his fault, that he had told the president. The president said, I wasn't briefed. Some senators say we did not know the truth about NSA. Others are keeping their mouths shut because maybe they were briefed a little bit more. It is a complete mess. The oversight is non-existent at the present time. It's hoped that there's some bills in Congress. Leahy and Sensenbrenner have introduced a bill 3 or 4 days ago that would actually overturn some of the Patriot Act, some of this great metadata collection that was allowed by the Patriot Act, but also it would increase oversight, because that is the problem. Without any accountability or oversight and complete secrecy, the NSA and the private contractors can do anything they want.
So well, I want to talk about that accountability, because I know from sources inside the government who know of instances that at the NSA where the individuals were listening into domestic phone calls, and on those domestic phone calls, husbands and wives were engaging in personal phone conversations of a sexual nature. Those phone calls were then pulled, circulated through the offices, and so I know this is taking place. This is documented evidence. Sources have revealed. So how are these people held accountable?
They were not held accountable. The conversations you're talking about, there was a whistleblower, I think. It was limited, it got limited play, but this was during the Bush administration, before the New York Times exposed this warrantless monitoring. And it was so bad that you're absolutely right. They were listening in on military people, what they called pillow talk between husbands and wives. Here's the lack of accountability. When this was discovered, they gave immunity to the telecoms. Congress, in its lack of wisdom, they were scared. Hayden, actually it was Hayden that came in, I think, at midnight before a recess and told them that they would risk another 9/11 unless they authorized an emergency measure to continue this warrantless monitoring. And it also gave immunity to the telecommunications company. That happened in August of 2007, and it was just a temporary. But then by the spring of the next year, early winter or late winter, the Congress then completely rubber stamped what the NSA was doing. Now, they may say they had limited information when they did that at the present time. Some of them maybe knew, some of them didn't. But there was no oversight whatsoever. And in fact, this encouraged the massive spying in the top secret America to go even further.
And then, of course, we have Edward Snowden, who comes out with the documentation, putting it all on the record, filling in the blanks, if you will.
That's right. Most of going back to the juicy conversations in intelligence collection, if you have a reason, I actually monitored legally during the 1980s when we were investigating the mafia in New York City, and we would get court orders that were signed by federal district judges, usually based on a year or two of investigative legwork. And, most of those conversations that you're listening in, they had to be minimized because they were not even relevant. But then every once in a while, you would get the conversation about the drug deal or about some planned murder. If you think about 1.7 billion, that's what the Washington Post documented in 2010 or 11, 1.7 billion pieces of data being vacuumed up and going into this giant NSA computer every day, every 24 hours. And that now totals trillions of pieces of data, including conversations and emails. And yesterday we learned Google and Yahoo, all of these email group lists that people have, etc. It's just massive.
Now, we're talking about domestic surveillance right now. Am I right?
It includes, yes, it absolutely includes domestic. And of course, it includes spying on allies. It includes the world. NSA's motto was collect it all.
So our viewers at home can be confident to know that their private conversations on their telephones, on their cell phones, on their computers, with complete confidence, they can say that their information is being harvested by the central government in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it's accurate to say harvested, or, our Fourth Amendment prohibits search and seizure. Now, that last part is seizure. The government argues that if they don't actually pull it out of the computer and a human doesn't actually listen to it, if it's just stored and seized in that computer, that it's okay.
Well, yeah, Dianne Feinstein came out and she said it's not surveillance. We're not surveilling, but they're just simply using another term. They're harvesting that data, and then they are storing it for later listening. So are they just simply using a word game here?
And the other part of this is, what is the level then? What's the threshold of evidence that an NSA analyst needs to have in order to go back into the computer now and create a report that is targeting or focusing on someone? And there were a few examples, not a lot, actually, for trillions of information, and I think there's 50,000 NSA employees. There were just a few examples of NSA employees who are, collecting info or checking on their neighbor or on a boyfriend of their daughter or things like that. So there were a few examples of that, but to their credit, it was not very many. But then on the other hand, this is all covered by complete secrecy. So there is no way for the average person to be sure of what's going on. And the one thing we can be sure of is that history repeats. And if you go back to the House Un-American Activities in the 50s, and if you go back to Hoover's COINTELPRO, and how information can be improperly used, and how the consequences for the First Amendment, people like yourselves, who are in the business of putting out news reports. And certainly if somebody comes to you and has some great information, like Deep Throat came to Woodward and Bernstein and had this great information about plumbers conducting burglaries and forgery of documents and all these things that Deep Throat knew about, the government can merely check on the telephone numbers to the reporter or the news source, and then find out every single person who has contacted them. And in fact, that has already begun. So this poses a terrible threat to democracy and to freedom of the press, freedom of association, freedom of speech.
Now, Colleen, I want to talk about spying programs and how they can harm national security, but we do need to take a quick break. Stay tuned for more. We're talking with former FBI agent, now whistleblower, Colleen Rowley, right here exclusively on WHDT World News.